Hey everybody, thanks for everyone who has joined us so far. My name is Annika. I'm going to be your presenter today for this webinar, and we're just going to wait a couple more minutes, let everyone else join up, and we'll be getting started at 3 p.m. sharp. Maybe for those of you who have joined up, if you could just quickly write into the chat box, maybe a yes if you can hear me and see me, and if everything looks good on your end, and that way we'll know that things seem to be working fine. Oh, great. So I don't see any chats from anyone yet, so I'm a little concerned maybe no one can hear me. If anyone can hear me, if they could just chat or write into the chat box, which should be at the bottom of your little panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And that should allow you to, see, there's a couple questions here. Oh, perfect. Okay. I apologize, everyone. I was looking in the wrong place. I can see everyone is typing into the question. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. Fantastic. Well, once again, welcome everybody. 3 o'clock, so I think we're going to dive right in, and we'll let everyone else who is joining on join up as they arrive. Fantastic. So I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar today in conjunction with Black Box Fitness. The way that I am related to Black Box is that I was a host on their Coaches Corner event a few weeks back before all this craziness started. They host a monthly Coaches Corner event, which facilitates connection and learning within the fitness community or in the Belfast and Northern Ireland area, as I'm sure many of you know. And so I was delighted to be a host for one of their events talking about exercise psychology and how personal trainers can use exercise psychology to enhance their own business and connect with their clients. So from that, once all this craziness started, Catherine from Black Box and I were thinking about what we could do together to provide some valuable content to those of you who are associated with Black Box, and we came up with this idea. So I hope very much that you enjoyed this short presentation. We're going to keep it to about 30-35 minutes of me presenting, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end where I'll do my best to answer as many questions as I can within, trying not to take much longer than an hour. And then if there's lingering questions after that, I've provided my contact details at the end, and I'm more than happy to get in touch with anyone to discuss any questions further. So without further ado, I'll just quickly introduce myself. So my name is Annika McGivern. I'm a sport and exercise psychology consultant. I'm originally from Canada, specifically from a small city called Victoria, British Columbia. And I've been in Ireland for about 2 years now. I have about 10 years of coaching experience, primarily in the world of high performance equestrian sport, where I worked as an athlete for many years. And it was through my experience as an athlete in that world that I encountered sports psychology and really fell in love with it, and became a real believer in how much it has to teach us. So I have an undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Victoria, and I also have a master's in sport and exercise psychology from Ulster University in Belfast. My own company is called Mind Aware Performance, and that's the platform I work from to teach as many people as I can about the value of sport and exercise psychology and how they can use it to enhance their performance in sport and exercise and business. And I specifically started working in exercise psychology because I realized that although exercise has such a psychological element to it, there isn't a lot. I realized that there isn't a lot of resources available to people to access the learning and the knowledge around the psychology behind it. And so I felt that that was somewhere that I could offer some help. And so I designed specific training now for personal trainers to help them sort of add value to their own business, add value to their clients, and to help individuals who are looking to enhance their own performance. So today we are going to focus on developing mental fitness. We're going to talk a little bit about what that is and how we can continue to develop our mental fitness even in the face of unexpected challenges like the one that we are experiencing right now. Quickly before I dive in here, we are going to be recording this session, so if anyone needs to hop off at any point, don't worry, we'll be sending out that recording afterwards. We also are going to be hosting 2 more webinars as part of this series. They are going to be on the following 2 Wednesdays from today at the same time, and more information will be sent out about those to those of you who are interested can sign up after this one. Great. So I just wanted to start out with this quote today from a gentleman called Viktor Frankl. So when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So I've always loved this quote, but I feel it has a lot of meaning in our current situation. There's a lot of things that we don't have control over right now. And so we are forced to really focus in on what we can control, which is our own attitude and our own reactions. And mental fitness is a big part of that. All right. So we all want to get through this, of course, but we want to do more than that. We don't want to just survive this event. We want to keep growing and developing and improving ourselves. And we actually want to flourish and succeed in spite of this event, and maybe even because of this unique situation that we're all finding ourselves in. So this journey, this sort of quest to finding and developing mental fitness is very much a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. The reason for this is that it requires us to partake in a lot of habit change. The way that we act and the way that we react to stressful situations are very much built on habits that we've formed over a lifetime of reacting to situations in similar ways. So in order to change our mental reactions, we need to go back and undo these habits and build new ones. And this can take time. We know that it takes up to 90 days, at least 90 days, and sometimes up to a year to actually change behaviors. However, this situation with COVID-19 has given us a really unique opportunity to practice new behaviors because everything in our environment has changed. It actually gives us a cool opportunity to implement new behaviors because everything around us is changing. It makes it easier for us to start acting and behaving in different ways. So when we think about mental fitness, it encompasses a lot of different terms, a lot of different ideas. And when we think about sort of optimal mental performance or optimal mental strength, what we know in sports psychology is that this is very much a pyramid. So in that resilience is often the goal. We always want to achieve resilience as people. We want to be able to handle any kind of negative situation that comes our way and come back from it stronger and more capable than before. But we can't just become resilient overnight. There's a lot of other foundational skills, psychological skills, that we need to form as a foundation before we can really truly grasp resilience. And so today we're going to start and take a closer look at sort of the foundational level of this pyramid. And in the following 2 webinars, we'll dive into the next 2 stages. But in order to get to that final stage of resilience, we really need to understand and implement mindsets, understand optimism, and understand our attitude and our choices behind those attitudes. So we're going to start with a little bit of a discussion around mindset, what it is and how we can use it to help us once we have a better understanding of what it actually is. So some of you may have heard of this concept before of a growth or a fixed mindset. So dialing back a step first, what is actually a mindset? So a mindset is something, it's a series of beliefs that inform and direct our thoughts and behaviors. So we have to be able to understand where these beliefs are coming from in order to change those thoughts and behaviors. So there's two mindsets that are both kind of rooted in very different sets of beliefs. If you have a growth mindset, you believe that your talents and your abilities are always and continually developing, and that they actually always have the capacity to change and grow no matter the situation. And this mindset is really essential for success, and I'll come back to why that is in a moment. So on the other hand, a fixed mindset is centered around the belief that the talents that you currently possess are all you're going to have. There's no chance of developing these further. That doesn't matter how much effort you put in, you're only ever going to be so good at something. So one way of bringing this to life is to consider yourself, what is something that you just see yourself as not being good at. So everyone has something, and it always differs depending on the person. For myself, for a long time, I used to believe that I just wasn't good at math. And I believe this because I always had sort of lower math grade results when I was in school, and I always seemed to do really well in my other subjects, but not in math. So I got this idea that I wasn't really good at math. And then that idea was cemented over the years as, test after test came and went, and I always seemed to get a poor grade in my math. And so that idea became cemented through experience into a belief. And then that belief became part of my identity. And I decided after a while that I just wasn't a math person. And this then became part of my identity. And because I decided I wasn't a math person, I basically stopped trying at math. And then, as you can imagine, my results didn't improve. So essentially, just that little anecdote explains how these mindsets are really rooted in deeply held beliefs. And we usually form these beliefs early on in life, and we tend to not consider or even allow into our mind the possibility that they're not actually true. So by studying mindset and understanding mindset, we start to be able to disable these fixed and unhelpful beliefs in order to change the way that we perceive our situation and the world around us. So when we're looking at these two mindsets, they can be sort of characterized by looking at 4 different elements. Okay, so someone who has a growth mindset sees a failure as, something that's definitely hard, something that's challenging, but also something that is ultimately a learning experience, because failing at something shows us what we are weak at and therefore shows us what we need to improve and gives us the opportunity to improve it. Similarly, with the growth mindset, those who hold it will see that effort is actually a key part of improvement, that the amount of effort you put in is going to be directly related to the results that you get out. You're going to look at other people in your life who are doing well and find inspiration, because they're going to show you that what is possible for you. And you're going to see challenge as an opportunity for growth. Okay. On the other hand, we see the fixed mindset is basically the exact opposite of this. Failures are to be avoided because they expose the things that we're bad at. We don't actually believe that we can get better at them. Effort is futile because it doesn't matter how hard we work, we don't believe that we can improve. Therefore, we're going to be intimidated by others because they are showing us everything we want to be but believe we can't be. And therefore, challenges are going to be something to be feared, because again, it's going to be just simply an opportunity to show or prove that we can't be good at what we want to be good at. So you can see how this mindset is really unhelpful. So this, instead, what we want to foster within ourselves are these growth mindset beliefs. So these are some examples of growth mindset beliefs. And so I'd encourage you guys to look through this list and really ask yourself, do you believe this about yourself? Do you actually believe that you're a creative person? Do you really actually believe deep down that you're able to adapt in challenging situations, that you benefit from asking other people for help, and so on and so forth? And sometimes we want to believe these things, but when we really look deeply at ourselves, we realize that we may not actually believe them deep down. And therefore, by realizing this, we can start to do a little bit of work around it and figure out what we need to change in order to get those beliefs feeling 100% true for ourselves. So mindset is not just straight up positivity. And I think everyone can agree that someone just telling you that, oh, it's all going to be fine and it's going to be okay and everything's going to work out fine often doesn't help because it doesn't resonate. We know that the world is actually a really hard place. We know that the situation we're in right now is full of really real challenges. It's not necessarily easy, and it's not necessarily always fun, and it's not always positive. So I'm not trying to sell a growth mindset to you as something that's just about being positive all the time. Instead, I want you to consider mindset as the belief that you have control and the capacity to learn and grow from any experience that you encounter. So again, mindset is about building up these beliefs so that we start to build the mental resources to cope effectively and healthily with challenges when we encounter them. Another way of thinking about mindset is to think of it as two versions of yourself that coexist within yourself. Everyone has moments in their life where they kind of fall into that fixed mindset trap, and everyone has moments where they are really working well in a growth mindset. We tend to have growth mindsets about the things that we find easy and that we really enjoy in our life, and we tend to have fixed mindsets about the things that we struggle with or that we don't enjoy. So if we kind of think about it, we all have experience acting from a growth mindset and acting from a fixed mindset. So you can start to really think about which version of yourself you want to choose to be. So coming back to that quote at the beginning of the presentation, we always have a choice about how we want to react to a situation. And by bringing awareness to who you are when you're in that growth mindset versus who you are when you're in that fixed mindset can help you consciously make a choice to react and act from a growth mindset and seek out the learning opportunities and challenges as opposed to focusing on the fear. Okay, so we're going to leave mindset here and just go on quickly to talk a little bit about anxiety, and then we're going to bring the two together and leave you guys with some take-home tips and tools, hopefully, that you can immediately start putting to work in your own life. So I know we've all become intimately familiar with anxiety over the last 3 weeks. I think for a lot of people who maybe already deal with some anxiety in their life, it's been increased exponentially. And for other people who don't normally experience a lot of anxiety, they found themselves suddenly, exposed to a lot of anxious thoughts and feelings. So off the bat, anxiety is completely normal. It's always normal when we're faced with this sort of amount of change and sudden shifts in our normality. So change is actually really difficult at the best of times, let alone when everything in your life sort of changes all at once and overnight. Our brain actually interprets change as threatening. And it actually prompts the small center of your brain, which deals with emotions and fear, the amygdala, to go into overdrive and starts to stimulate the fight or flight response in our bodies. So as a result of all this change, everyone's amygdalas are being triggered, and we're all experiencing heightened emotions of this sort of fear, fight or flight response. So, and there's a couple other things that are feeding into this as well. The fear of contamination or disease is a deep, deep fear. was one of the sort of primal fears that goes, dates way back to early days. And so it's something that's very hard for us to not react to. And then in addition to that, something is always scarier when it moves towards you really quickly. So if you imagine a fire truck, sort of the siren sounding in the distance, if it's far away from you and it's over there and you can sort of hear it remotely, but not too loudly, that's not going to worry you. On the other hand, if that fire truck and that siren starts getting louder and louder and coming, you can hear it coming closer and closer and closer to you, your anxiety is going to go up, because the likelihood of that threat affecting you is getting much, much stronger. So I think what's happened with this COVID-19 situation is that there's been a really rapid acceleration of all of this becoming very, very close to us very, very quickly. And that can create a lot of anxiety as well. So in the face of all this, what are we going to do? It can be really challenging actually to dig in and change your mindset at the best of times, let alone when we're all in the middle of a crisis and dealing with all this heightened anxiety. But I also want to suggest to you that this crisis itself is an opportunity, because what it's done is it's jolted everybody kind of out of our daily routine, and it's put us in this state of anxiety, which in itself is encouraging all of us to seek out opportunities for learning and development, because we don't want to be anxious like this. We want to find a way to cope with it. And so that's moving everybody towards seeking out this opportunity to learn. And that's what brought a lot of you here today, to hopefully learn some new skills which will help you now, and I think 100% are going to continue to help you for the rest of your life. So when we look at anxiety, we know that it's all about the gap between the challenge that we have in front of us and the resources that we feel that we have, or the ways that we feel we can actually deal with and confront that challenge. So when we see a resilient person, a big part of that person's resilience is that they know that they have a lot of resources to draw on, and they're aware of their resources, and therefore that challenge seems less threatening. So what we want to do is try to narrow the gap between the challenge and the resources by helping us all become more aware of the resources we do have and what we can do to access them. So I came across this little model in terms of dealing with anxiety recently, and I wanted to share it with all of you because I think it's very useful and easy to remember. So we'll talk through all three stages here quickly. So when we have an anxious experience, the first step is just the experience of that anxiety. And it can be quite powerful. I think we're all probably familiar with that after what we've all gone through over the last 3 weeks, or the intensity of that uncertainty and the fear around what's going to happen and what we don't know. And so the first step is to really just ride the wave of that anxiety, accept that it's going to be overwhelming, and try to be kind to yourself. Practice some awareness of your own emotions and thoughts. Try to be aware of how you're feeling and thinking, but don't feel like you need to fix it right away, because it can be very hard to kind of move to the next stage before you've let all that anxiety process through your body in some way. So once the wave or the intensity sort of starts to reduce a little bit, the next step is to try and let go. And this is where the element of choice comes in. So what we need to do is consider if the way that we're thinking or feeling is actually adding any value to us, if it's helping us at all. And if not, we need to try and let it go. And this can be really difficult because it actually feels quite good sometimes to wallow in a place of fear. So now that can sound sort of counterintuitive because nobody likes being anxious. But we often have this belief, and a lot of people share this belief. It's one of the foundational, what we would call foundational and rational beliefs that's shared across humanity. And it's that I must get upset when bad things are happening. So if you think about that for a second, I must get upset when bad things are happening. We can all resonate with that we're sort of supposed to get upset when bad things are happening in our life. But is that a helpful belief? Maybe not. And it's been identified as a rational belief because it's not necessarily true. We don't have to get upset. We can actually choose to react a different way. Now, it's easy enough to say that, but what do you do if you still really feel really stuck in that sort of cycle of negative thinking? One thing you can do is to ask yourself, what would it actually take to stop feeding that thought or feeling? So how am I actually feeding this feeling or these thoughts in myself? And how can I stop chasing after this thought? We all have a bit of responsibility for our thoughts and our actions, but it actually takes a lot of courage to claim that responsibility and make a change and choose to react differently. So once we've sort of got our head around that choice and we're thinking, okay, maybe we do want to consider a different way of reacting to this, a different way of feeling, then we need to let in. And that means that we allow ourselves to start moving towards something helpful. Okay, and so how do we actually do that? So it's kind of a false belief as well that motivation needs to precede action. And in fact, science actually shows us the opposite, that when there's a lack of motivation, what we need to do is act first in order to create the motivation. So what that means is that we shouldn't wait around on our couches until sort of motivation strikes us to do something different or react to this. What we need to do is create that action first. And so the best way to do this is to start asking yourself questions. What would I need to do to feel better right now? Or what is the first step towards me feeling a little bit more in control in this moment? What can I do right now that would make me smile? What am I good at? Or how can I help someone else? So these are all examples of the types of questions you can start to ask yourself if you're feeling really paralyzed by anxiety, to start getting your brain ticking in a new direction. Our brains are really wonderful things. Once we get them working and thinking in those types of helpful questions, they tend to sort of kick in and start on this more positive upward spiral. And we find that hopefulness and creativity start really flowing then. And it really just starts with asking ourselves those questions. So when we're struggling with decisions in this context, what do I do first? How do I go about helping someone? How do I go about finding ways to be productive in this challenging time? It can be really helpful to get clear on our own values and use these values as a way to orient ourselves within that decision-making process. So values are sort of core fundamental beliefs around who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world, how we want other people to view us. And so what I've done actually, you'll see in the drop-down screen on the right-hand side here, under handouts, you'll see that there is a worksheet there. So you don't need to download it right now. This is something you can all do in your own time if you're interested afterwards. But I've outlined a values exercise, which will help all of you kind of identify and zero in on your core values, so that you can start to sort of use these values as a bit of an orientation guide or kind of North Star to help you guys through the difficult decisions that we're all going to be making over the next little while as we figure out how to cope with this ever-changing environment. And then also for the rest of your life, really, as you go through various situations where we all have to face challenging decision-making. So this exercise will basically take you through the process of listing out all of the values that you feel are important to you, grouping them, and then using those groups to identify your core values. Another thing we can do as we start to try to build these mental resources for us to fall back on in these challenging times is to really zero in on what our own strengths are. So one way to figure out what our strengths are is to actually look back in time at a previous challenging time in your life and to identify what you did in those times or what strengths and resources you use to help you get through that previous challenging time. So for example, working through this exercise, and this is also included in the workbook that I added for you guys, allows us to really identify in detail what we did in the past that allowed us to grow through that adversity. So once we've gone through that exercise and we're able to identify those strengths and resources, we're then able to apply those to current situations. So taking our kind of global current situation at the moment, you can look back on those previous situations and think to yourself, okay, which strengths and resources that I now know that I have can I draw on for this situation? It's also interesting to think and sort of ask yourself, what are the specific coping skills that you want to develop? And once you've identified those, think to yourself, how could you use this situation as an opportunity to grow? So you can see now that we're starting to tap into that growth mindset. And we're taking a step back from the situation and the challenge and trying to find the opportunities for growth. And we're going to use the strengths and the resources that we've identified through thought and reflection to help us grow and continue to move forward in our current situation. Whenever we sort of commit to changing our behavior, it's a really good idea to share this commitment with another person. And what this does is it really holds us accountable for our actions and allows us to, or it prevents us rather, from slipping back into our old ways. And so I would encourage everyone to, if you're thinking about really changing some behaviors moving forward, to not just keep that to yourself, but to share it with at least one other person in your life. Okay, so this concept here is really zeroing in on what discomfort is and how we can sort of reframe it into something that's useful for us. So when we're uncomfortable, we often feel anxious. We're very strongly connected. When we're in that sort of discomfort zone, it tends to trigger our fight or flight response. And so we need to reframe it in this way. We need to reframe it that being uncomfortable is actually a positive sign that learning is happening and that change is happening. And once we start to recognize discomfort as a signal that we're right on the edge of our abilities, and so therefore we're really learning and developing, then we can start to see it as something useful instead of something inherently scary. So when we're in this center zone here where everything's easy, we're not really challenging ourselves. We're just kind of existing day to day. When we move out into the center ring where things are difficult, that's where we tend to feel the discomfort. Things start to feel really challenging, and we often need help to then progress into the stage again, back into the stage where that new task that we've learned starts to feel easy again. So for the most part, we all tend to exist in this little easy bubble, and we sort of hop in and out of the difficult bubble at different points in our lives, and get help when we need it, and then sort of go through this continuous progression. But what this situation with COVID-19 has done, excuse me, is it sort of shoved all of us out into this difficult zone all at once, all together. And so this has a really interesting effect because everyone is actually experiencing this all together, all at the same time. And so this sort of massive shared level of discomfort it's difficult for everybody. But what it's also doing is it's giving everyone, it's showing us all what we need to learn. And it is showing us where the opportunity for that learning is. And I really believe that because everyone is experiencing it all together, I think that we're all going to see really unprecedented levels of empathy and support and help from everyone around us, because we can all relate to this feeling right now. Everyone is going through this in one way or another. So I'd really encourage you all to take advantage of this and ask for as much help as you can from those around you, and really start collaborating with everyone in your life to sort of problem solve together. And so that we can all sort of come back into the easy bubble again together, and start to feel like we're more in control of the situation. So essentially what we're needing to do here is to dig deep. And what I mean by this is that we need to sort of dig down into our deeper beliefs about ourselves in order to start adjusting our mindset, and therefore build a foundation for us to then build those higher level psychological skills like resilience, which are going to be really, really useful to us now and in the future. So by digging deep and getting into these deeper beliefs and our mindset around our lives, we can really start to build what I like to think of as like a foundation of calm strength. I'd really encourage everyone to explore just something as simple as deep breathing exercises, and also to explore some meditation work. Both of these things are really fantastic for helping us tap into and strengthen our sort of foundational beliefs, foundational calm, from which we can then start to build and develop our psychological skills. And really what's cool about this way of being when we start to achieve these really stable growth mindsets for ourselves is that this way of thinking is really contagious and it spreads really easily amongst the people in our lives. So by taking the time to practice this yourself, you are going to have a huge impact on everyone around you in your community. So I really encourage you to not only do this work and think about this for yourself, but really share what you've learned and what you continue to learn to help those around you. Okay, so I just want to encourage everybody here to think for a moment about what are 3 takeaways or action points from everything I just talked about there that sort of resonated with you. And it could just be one thing, it could be more than 3, it doesn't really matter. But it's important for you in terms of being able to take this forward that you identify them and think about them now and sort of really name them for yourself. Once you've come up with the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you feel like you really want to take forward or learn more about, I want you to think about asking yourself, okay, when are you actually going to start that? When are you going to start trying to learn more? When are you going to start thinking about your own mindset, for example? And then lastly, like I mentioned before, who is actually going to hold you accountable for these changes as you set out on this path towards changing a little bit about the way that you think and act? And these 3 steps are just going to make it, excuse me, much easier for you to actually go forward and make some real changes in your lives. And lastly, I want you to consider why this is important to you. So what brought you here today? What sparked your curiosity? It could be as simple as this has been a really difficult 3 weeks and I want to learn more skills, or it could be a more complicated answer. But by really thinking about why you are interested in this, why you want to potentially make some changes around your own thoughts and behaviors, again, this is going to help you really commit to pursuing this further in a way that's going to help you create some lasting change. So we're going to finish up here with one more Viktor Frankl quote. I'm a big fan of this guy at the moment. He has some wise words, which is somewhere between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In the response lies our growth and freedom. And so for me, what this quote is really saying that, again, we always have a choice between, we always have a choice about how we want to react. And sometimes we're not aware of that choice because we're not aware of the space that lies between the event and the reaction. And so self-awareness and education allows us to see that space and understand it, and therefore be able to make a choice. And so mental fitness to me is really starts with being able to see that space and start to be able to react in a way that we consciously choose and not just react in ways that our biology or our habits predictate for us. And so it's this, for me, it's a very crucial sort of first step in this journey towards becoming more mentally fit. All right, well, thanks, guys. Sorry I went a few minutes longer than I hoped there, but that's going to wrap up sort of the presentation side of the webinar for today. I'm going to leave this up on the screen here for anyone who wants to take down my details in terms of contacting me further. Again, like I said before, I'm delighted to talk with anyone about this in a more personal way, and so don't hesitate to reach out. The handout should be there for you guys to download. And what I'm going to do now is go into the questions. And if anybody has a burning question about something that's come up in the presentation, then I will be more than happy to answer them right now. So I see here, where do we access the handouts? You talked about, Annika. So to the best of my knowledge, it should be one of the little panels in the gray box, the gray box, which should be on the right of your screen. Should say handouts, and that should give you access. I'll just double check my information here. Yeah, so the best of my knowledge, it should just be on the right. So if that's not working, let me know. Okay, just above the question panel. Perfect. Thank you, Matthew. That's perfect. Okay, any advice on helping clients focus on their fitness instead of giving into fear and falling away? Perfect. Yeah, that's a great question, Grace. I think we're seeing that across the fitness industry right now, where people aren't able to maintain their fitness routines because they're sort of paralyzed by this fear, and it's sort of taking over their energy. And so it can be very hard to keep them focused on that routine. And the challenge is that, of course, we want them to stay focused on that routine because we know that that's actually going to ultimately help them. So to be honest, my advice would be having a bit of a conversation with that client around, in fact, their mindset. So bringing some awareness to them, which a lot of people sort of don't have the awareness around mindset. So bringing the awareness to them as to how they're choosing to react to the challenge at hand, and have a bit of a conversation with them about how they want to react to this crisis, how they want to. One good question is, how do you want to look back, or how do you want to feel about your reaction to this when you're looking, if you're looking back on it from 6 months in the future? So ask them to imagine that, they're 6 months or a year in the future. We're all okay, everything's gone back to normal. They're looking back on this time, and ask them, what would feel like a successful memory to you, if that makes sense. What would, looking back, what would you need to do now in order for your future self to feel like you handled this really well? So that's a good question. Yeah, bringing more awareness to the strength of the psychological processes behind the fear. So again, sometimes if people don't understand why they're so afraid, it can be very hard to get a sense of control over it. So even just the simple process of explaining to someone why it is that they're feeling this anxiety, that a part of their brain is reacting really strongly to all the change and the uncertainty in their environment, can start to give them a bit more of a grasp on their own emotions. So we talk a lot in psychology about allowing people to take a step back and sort of look at their own thinking in order to get a better handle on it. Are there any mindset resources you would recommend to give to clients? Yeah, absolutely. So Carol Dweck is the author and sort of original author of the mindset. I can probably write this in there for you guys. The mindset theory, and I believe that's how you spell it. If anyone wants to know. Not sure if that came up or not, but yeah, Carol Dweck. So she has a number of articles. If you just type in growth versus fixed mindset, even on Google, a lot will come up. And she also has a great book. So I think in terms of resources, those are really helpful. And there's also a lot of value in, just like I said, even just taking the slides from this presentation and talking through it with the clients in just sort of a very basic introductory way. Perfect. Okay, so we'll just move on here to Jamie's question. I know what I should be doing, but I'm struggling to find the motivation to do so. Any advice to building up motivation and getting out of the laziness hole? Yeah, absolutely. So like I said earlier, motivation is a really tricky thing. It's very elusive. It comes and goes. And we often feel like we need to find motivation first in order to get us doing something. But really the secret is to actually just start doing something in order to trigger your motivation. So my advice would be to start small. So I'm not sure, Jamie, if you're talking about sort of exercise related stuff or something else in your life, but either way, you can actually just choose a very small action. So say, for example, this would just be a very simple example, but I was struggling to find the motivation to make dinner. So, and to get off the couch, maybe and make dinner. Then I would want to essentially get myself doing some sort of an action. But I wouldn't, because I'm struggling with the motivation of the big picture of making dinner, maybe the first action is just picking up my phone and looking for inspiration for recipes online. So by just creating that action, then what we find is that that triggers a little bit of motivation after the fact. So Jamie, hopefully that answers your question there. Sorry guys, I'm just gonna scroll up here to get the top of this next question. Any advice on how to manage clients and players during this period? Players have no idea when competition will regain. It's a great time for them to work on areas of weakness and stay ahead of themselves so they come back in good condition. But a lot are struggling to stay motivated. Should I still keep emphasizing the importance to do the sessions I said, or will this have a potentially negative effect? Trying to motivate and emphasize the importance of the benefits, the physical benefits this will have. Yeah, for sure, Peter, this is a huge challenge that a lot of athletes are facing right now. Because a lot of what drives the motivation in sport is the competitive element, right? It's the game or the competition that we're working towards as an athlete. And so when that gets removed, sometimes it can be very hard to find the motivation to carry on. So I think, first of all, what you want to do is help them tap into what we would call intrinsic motivation, which is the part of their sport that they do, or the reason that they do their sport, which is really just based in their sheer enjoyment and love of it. And it's not related to outcomes like winning games or competitions. And so getting them to reflect on sort of why they love the sport and why they love participating in that sport can help sort of tap into a deeper level of motivation to carry on. Also, you want to really draw on their sense of identity. So for example, a soccer player or a football player is going to have a really strong identity as being a football player. And so sort of framing things as, you know, this is what a committed football player does in the face of challenges. We get creative, we look for opportunities to develop, can help kind of tie in with their sense of identity of who they are and who they want to be. Sorry, I'm just looking through the second part of this question here. Should I still keep emphasizing the importance? Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to emphasize the routine and keep them on a routine. However, it's also important to be somewhat flexible within that. I think because everyone is struggling with this, and sometimes if we just coast over the hard part and try to focus too strongly on the let's keep going part, people don't feel like they're really being heard. So potentially one way that you could sort of balance that out is by incorporating some mindset work or some how to deal with anxiety work into your sessions, so that you're sort of acknowledging that things are hard and that we do need to develop some additional skills while we're coping with this. But essentially, oops, sorry, I've lost my thing there. Yeah, it's not going to have a negative effect as long as you sort of acknowledge both sides of what's happening. But yes, we do need to keep going, but also this is challenging, if that makes sense. Feel free to reach out to me, Peter, again, if we want to have a deeper conversation or a more lengthy conversation on that. So we'll move on to James here. Any advice on how to tackle coping mechanisms, new behaviors brought on by stress? Interesting. Okay, so I'm assuming, James, that you're sort of referring to potentially sort of negative coping mechanisms or things that ways of coping that you feel aren't helpful to you, or unhelpful behaviors. So the best thing there is to name them, like acknowledge them, and really kind of bring to your awareness that that's something that's new and that you don't want to carry on doing, and then to directly replace them with with behaviors that you do want. So for example, maybe I know something I've been doing a lot more and I've been hearing around from other people is that everybody's just like all of a sudden eating way more than they want to in terms of like, you know, sugary, sort of that comfort eating, because we're all at home. We're only a short step away from our kitchen, and you know, the temptation to eat unhealthy foods is high. And so just trying to stop that behavior is challenging unless you replace it with something else. So a habit or behavior is usually formed from some sort of a trigger, and then there's the behavior that happens as a result of that trigger, which is then rewarding, and which is why we repeat it. So if I'm triggered by being stressed, that I want something sweet, and then I eat something sweet, and that temporarily distracts me from my stress because it's tasty, then that's a reward, and I'll be more likely to do that again. So you want to replace the unwanted behavior with something that is still going to be rewarding in some way, but rewarding in a healthy way. So again, James, if you want to talk more about that, feel free to reach out to me and we can dive into that a bit more. Stephen, hey Stephen, I'm a huge fan of James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. You mentioned this is a time of opportunity to create new habits. Can you give any help or top tips in order to help with that? Yeah, absolutely. So someone said to me the other day, which I thought was really relevant, is that we're almost like we're all stuck in that movie Groundhog Day, where I think it's Tom Hanks, like wakes up every morning and it's the same day over and over again, because we're all kind of stuck at home. And so what this does is it gives us an opportunity, like no other really, to start to implement new routines or to tweak our existing routine day by day to see what really works for us. And so I believe that this is a really cool opportunity because everyone's lives have completely changed overnight. So often it's really difficult to incorporate new habits within the context of our normal lives because all of the routines and habits we have around our normal lives are really powerful and difficult to change. So because we're kind of in this void of our normal behavior at the moment, we can really become a little bit more aggressive in a way about implementing a whole series of new behaviors. So one thing I would say is get very clear on the behaviors or changes you want to make, write them down, write down why you want to make these behaviors. Think about how you're going to feel when you have successfully implemented this behavior. And then also think of advance as about all the things that could potentially get in the way or prevent you from successfully making these changes, and then create a little plan around each of those potential issues for how you're going to deal with it. And so that is going to bring a lot of conscious awareness to your desired behavior change and make it much more likely that you can do it successfully. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what comes to mind there, Stephen. And again, once again, don't hesitate to chat with me further about this. We'll move on here to Jennifer. How do you start a dialogue with a client who is a highly emotional individual and therefore can be trapped in fear, therefore blocking them from growth? I find sometimes if you say that these beliefs have been ingrained since they were young, this can be very difficult to encourage them to question themselves. Yeah, absolutely. So anytime that we start to sort of tackle people's deeply held beliefs, it can be very, very challenging because these are really sensitive things for people, and they're sort of deeply held parts of their identity. So my biggest piece of advice there, Jennifer, is to approach this through a lot of questions. So it doesn't work well to tell people that you feel that they have a belief that's blocking them. People can get very defensive, and especially if someone's emotional, that sort of defensive reaction can be very, it can be very quick to come about. So instead, try to bring their own awareness to it through asking a lot of open-ended questions. So for example, asking her, why do you think you're experiencing this much fear right now? Where do you think that fear is coming from? Is there an experience or a previous experience in your life that you can remember where you felt like this? How did you feel that you got through it? So actually bringing that strengths exercise that's in the workbook to that client could be really helpful, because they will then be able to work through that previous experience and identify some strengths. And then once you've sort of identified some strengths and resources, it can be a little bit easier to then bring the conversation around through some questions to where they're struggling. So Jennifer, I hope that helps. It can be very challenging to facilitate a conversation through questions, because we're so used to sort of providing information towards people instead of getting them to come up with the answers themselves. But with this type of work, it's so much more beneficial to spend the extra time to help to ask the right questions and getting that person to sort of arrive at that discovery themselves. And they'll be so much more receptive to it. So anytime that you're having these conversations, just keep asking yourself, how can I phrase this as a question? Okay, so moving on to Chris. My question is, what do you see as the main benefits of journaling, and how can you help clients start making it a daily habit? So for me, the main benefit of journaling is that it sort of facilitates what I was talking about before, that ability to take a step back out of your own mind and observe your own thoughts. Because when we journal, we're obviously writing down our thoughts, and then we're able to come back to it at a later time and read over it. It starts to get people into that frame of mind where they're able to actually take a step back and reflect on their own thoughts at a different time. So I think that's really the main benefit there. It can really facilitate a lot of self-awareness development, and it also allows people to sort of get a handle on and track their behaviors over time, and maybe draw connections between behaviors and outcomes that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. In terms of instilling that as a habit, I think, like any other habit, you have to sort of follow the same framework. So identify it as something that you want to change, decide why you want to change it, imagine, think about how your life is going to be different once you've managed to make that change. What are the benefits going to be? What are the things that are going to block you from making that change? And then creating a plan to get ahead of those potential roadblocks. So for example, it'd be really good for them to identify what the best time of the day probably would be for them to journal. For example, if they're just too busy in the morning, that's going to be a potential block. So perhaps they build a habit around doing it in the evening instead. Okay, moving on to Matthew here. Does that process you described, Jennifer, relate to motivational interviewing? Do you recommend practitioners seeking some training in it? Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. It does relate to motivational interviewing. The official term for it is Socratic questioning. So you can Google that, and you can actually, I think, find a whole list of Socratic questions. That's something I was actually planning to go into a little bit more in depth in the next webinar when we talk more about developing self-awareness. So there will be some more information on that next week. So absolutely, Matthew, I think that there's definitely always benefit in training in it. There's a lot you can find out just by jumping on YouTube and learning about it that way. And then there's also a more formal route, usually through cognitive behavioral therapy, or sorry, cognitive behavioral coaching courses, usually include an element of Socratic questioning or motivational interviewing, which can be incredibly useful. Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Stephen. And Jennifer, are there any psychologists that you follow yourself who have YouTube channels where you can listen to them speaking? Jennifer, that's a great question. I don't actually follow, actually one YouTube channel that I do follow is Mind Valley, M-A-N-D-V-A-L-L-E-Y. And they have a number of resources there that are really interesting, that have a huge range, but they do have a couple of psychologists that regularly speak. Marissa Peers is a very interesting woman. She talks a lot about those foundational core beliefs and how they affect us. So I would definitely recommend her. So that's Marissa Peers, and she is linked through Mind Valley, and you'll find a number of other psychologists through that channel that are very interesting. Other than that, I'm drawing a complete blank at the moment. I don't tend to follow a lot of people on YouTube. But for example, like I said before, Carol Dweck is fantastic in terms of all of her work with mindset. So I'm not sure if she has a channel, but any of her kind of written work would be worth pursuing. That's great. Thanks so much. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all the great questions, guys, and for coming along and hanging out with me here for the last hour. I really appreciate it. And so, like I said, Black Box and I are going to be hosting 2 more webinars in this series. They're going to take place next Wednesday and the Wednesday afterwards, both again at the same time at 3 p.m. We'll be sending out the link for that through the same email list that attended this webinar. So if you'd like and you're interested, you can join on for those as well. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, again. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. And I hope everyone is starting to wrap their heads around all the changes that have happened recently. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.